DVD extras.
Can I just... There was one more film which I want to do quickly, because this is the sort of extra thing.
If you could be quick.
Well, I will try and be quick, which is called Khodorkovsky, which is about Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Do you know Mikhail Khodorkovsky? He was...
Remind me.
OK, so at one point he was the richest man under 40 on the planet. And under Putin, he was one of the sort of super-rich oligarchs who benefited from carving up and selling off state-owned industry. He was part of Yukos Oil, which he turned into a multi-billion-dollar cash cow. Then the story is he fell out with Putin. The next thing, he funded some education thing, which apparently somebody said, you don't fund education because that's a state thing to do. That's not, you're going to put the government's nose out of joint. Then he sort of went head-to-head with Putin in terms of investigation of corruption in the Kremlin. And he became a supporter of one of Putin's opponents. The next thing, he got arrested for tax evasion, was sent off to prison in Siberia and has remained incarcerated ever since. The documentary is very, very interesting. I have to say I didn't know anything about the story of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and it sounds like you didn't either. But you must have not heard of it at all. I mean, I hadn't.
Yes,
it rings some kind of bells. Okay,
ringing a few bells.
Interesting combination of very well pitched interviews, some animation which seemed to me to be inspired to some extent by Waltz with Bashir. Having spent one of the worst weeks of my life in Russia and the Ukraine in the 1980s when I was doing the set report.
You should write about that.
I should write a book about that. Yeah. It's what's astonishing is how much what this film seems to suggest is that essentially the corruption and political shenanigan that was rife back then, which I think to some extent many people, myself included, had opened up slightly, is still as rife as ever. I mean, essentially what you get here is a portrait of somebody who sets their jaw against the establishment. The next thing you know, they're in prison and off to Siberia in a way that you might imagine had kind of gone out of fashion now with the open Russia and the idea that everything is now much more open than before. It is a quite eye-opening portrayal of power, corruption and greed, and a fascinating story that suggests at some point that in fact it may be that all of this is part of a plan to rise to power by somehow becoming a political prisoner. Watch it if you don't know anything about the story, which I didn't. Very engrossing, very interesting, and plenty of really moments. And at first I wasn't entirely sure about the animation, but I thought it did all come together.